All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Judicial Proceedings Committee. Today is Wednesday, February 22nd. We have 11 bills on the docket. We're going to start off with Senate Bill 706. We'll then go to 710, 711, 701, 702, 703, 705, 709, 657, 867, and then we'll end up with Senator West with Senate Bill 499. So with that, we'll start off with Senate Bill 706. Welcome. Of course, yes. And we'll turn the mic on.
Yeah.
All right, good afternoon, Chairman Smith and members of the committee. I am Kevin Geisweit. I am the Executive Director of the Child Support Administration for Maryland's Department of Human Services. And I thank you for the opportunity to testify today in support of Senate Bill 706. I am joined today by our Acting Secretary of the Department of Human Services, Rafael Lopez, as well as Ms. Courtney Thomas Winterberg, who is Director of the Allegheny Department of Social Services and Chair of the Maryland Association of Social Services Directors, or MASD. And I thank them both for their presence today in support of this bill. Ms. Thomas Winterberg's presence as a local partner is on behalf of all of our child support workers who assist families each and every day in supporting Maryland's children and families. Excuse me. The Department's Child Support Administration administers the Maryland State Directory of New Hires, a federally required function for employers to report newly hired employees. While the department administers the State Directory of New Hires, the statute is codified in the Labor and Employment article under the Department of Labor. The information reported is used by both departments. Senate Bill 706 expands the authority for the Department of Human Services Child Support Administration to collect additional information using the State Directory of New Hires that will not impact the Department of Labor. As only employers are required to submit newly hired employees, Maryland is currently unable to obtain employment information for independent contractors. Senate Bill 706 will amend family law to add a subsection to define earnings as monies received by an independent contractor as reported on the IRS Form 1099, and also to require the reporting of these independent contractors using our State Directory of New Hires. It is important for the Child Support Administration to identify who is working as independent contractors in order to properly locate parents who owe support, to establish support orders based on realistic income and the ability to pay, and to identify how best to attach the earnings to support Maryland's children. For these reasons, I strongly urge a favorable report by the committee, and thank you for the opportunity to testify. Ms. Thomas Winterberg will also have testimony.
Good afternoon, Chairman Smith, Vice Chair Waldstreicher, and members of the committee. I am Courtney Thomas Winterberg. I'm the Chair of the Maryland Association of Department of Social Service Directors. We represent the 24 local jurisdictions. We have tremendous experience administering the child support programs at the local level here in Maryland. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of Senate Bill 706. Senate Bill 706 is a significant measure that aims to increase our resources to effectively administer the child support program here in Maryland. Currently, employers are required to report newly hired employees to the State Directory of New Hires. This reporting requirement assists the departments with locating parents, verifying wages, and establishing child support obligations based on the non-custodial parents' wages. Unfortunately, the same reporting requirement does not extend to independent contractors or 1099 employees in Maryland. With the growth of the gig economy and the number of businesses hiring independent contractors, this has created a challenge for the local departments, resulting in unnecessary delays and barriers to the establishment and collection of child support for the families we serve. We know that wages account for the largest percentage of child support distributions statewide, which underscores the importance of accurately verifying the wages of non-custodial parents. When this cannot be done, children may receive less support than they are entitled to, which can have negative consequences for their well-being and their families. Senate Bill 706 addresses this issue by extending the reporting requirement to employers who hire independent contractors in the state of Maryland. On behalf of the Maryland Association of Social Service Directors, I respectfully ask that you support Senate Bill 706, making Maryland the 19th state in the nation, in addition to Guam, who has already extended this requirement.
We have any questions you may have.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Questions from the committee? Senator West has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm looking at the bill, just the language in the bill, subsection on page 4, section 10-139B says, within 20 days after an independent contractor begins employment, the independent contractor's employer shall submit some information to the administration. So question number 1 is, are you confident that employers are going to know that they have this requirement? How are you going to let them know they have to do this?
Thank you. Thank you for your question. We're going to utilize the same mechanisms we use with our employers, in which we have a vendor that runs our state director new hire program, and they provide outreach. They'll be reaching out to independent contractors to identify them, to let them know the requirement, as well as how to submit the information to us.
Okay, good. And then the second half of that is, this appears to be a one-time report. The social security number, the name, the address, the date of employment, and the rate of compensation. But then down below in C, it says if an employer chooses to transmit data magnetically at a rate of twice per month, which would sound to me as if they have to submit this information repeatedly. I don't find any obligation to submit it more than once in B. Where is there a provision in here that requires them to submit this information with regularity?
Correct. And you're just correct. You don't have to report one time for the independent contract they're identifying.
Okay.
The opportunity would be they could report repeatedly for numbers of the submissions that they're making at one time. So they could do that twice a month, up to that much amount of time, that they can provide us the information that we would need on all of their independent contractors that are reporting, but it only be one time for each independent contractor. So as a new independent contractor is hired, they would then be reported to the process.
Okay, so you're talking about an employer that employs a lot of independent contractors
Yes.
and repeatedly provides you with information
Exactly.
about new hires. Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you and good afternoon. I just wanted to look, or try to make certain I'm understanding the definition or the new definition of the term employer. So on page 2, lines 26 through 28 and carry on over to page 3. It says an employer is a person who is paying earnings to an independent contractor for services provided in the course of an employer's trade or business that the employer reports or expects to report on the IRS form 1099. So a person, I'm curious, could a person be someone who's hiring an electrician and expected to pay maybe $10,000 for work that's being done in his or her own home? Is that who you're trying to capture? Or are we trying to capture who you said, which are businesses that are using temps and contractors rather than real employees?
Yeah, thank you for your question. It would be the businesses. Obviously, we wouldn't be able to go after individual who are hiring them. They'd be hired for the business, and that's who we would want to report to us, that they're independent contractors.
Not for individuals who are hiring contractors?
Correct.
That's the intent. Thank you.
Yeah.
Further questions from the committee? All right. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Mr. Secretary. Thank you. We have one virtual witness. We'll hear from DeBosque, Ms. DeBosque. Jennifer, is she here? All right.
Here we go. Bring it out.
All right, we're ready to go. We see you and we can
Okay.
hear you.
Good, thank you. Sorry, I was having trouble connecting. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman, and members of the committee. My name is Jennifer DeBosque, and I'm the Director of the Dorchester County Department of Social Services. I've submitted written testimony in support of Senate Bill 706. In addition to that testimony, I would like to add a few highlights related to why I feel as though this bill should be passed. Senate Bill 706 would require employers to report independent contractors to the State Directory of New Hires, just as they do with all other employees. This would help ensure that independent contractors who owe child support payments are identified and located at their actual wages, and that their actual wages are used to determine their child support obligation. Earnings withholding orders from identified employers helped us distribute over $1.5 million in support to the children we serve in Dorchester County in federal fiscal year 2022. Having the ability to do the same for contractors that pay through 1099 withholdings would significantly aid us in supporting children, as well as successfully meeting our federal collection goal each fiscal year. Dorchester County is a rural area with a relatively high number of independent contractors. With the ability to verify this type of employment on a consistent basis, the children of Dorchester County will be better off. On behalf of the Dorchester County Department of Social Services, along with the Maryland Association of Social Services Directors, I strongly encourage your support of Senate Bill 706 so the children receive financial support they need and deserve. Thank you for the opportunity.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Vosk. Seeing no questions from the committee, that'll be it. Thank you very much. All right, that concludes the testimony in the hearing for Senate Bill 706. We'll now move on to Senate Bill 710. Come on up. Welcome.
Hi there. May I bring up the panel?
Of course.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Smith, Vice Chair Wallstreicher, and honorable committee members. I am Denise Conway, the Executive Director of the Social Services Administration at the Department of Human Services. I am joined today by our Acting Secretary, Rafael Lopez, and Ms. Courtney Thomas Winterberg, who is the Director of the Allegheny County Department of Social Services and the Chair of the Maryland Association of Social Services Directors. I thank you for the opportunity to support Senate Bill 710. Last year, you passed this bill out of committee, but unfortunately, it was not passed out of the House in time. Maryland's children should be safe from maltreatment, no matter where they are. In order for Child Protective Services to share information about certain CPS investigations with public and private schools, the Human Services article would need to expand to permit the sharing of neglect investigations with schools. Under the current law, sharing of child abuse reports is already permitted. In addition, the statute would need to allow for improved information sharing with the child placement agencies regarding any CPS response. At present, Human Services Article Section 1-202 authorizes the disclosure of reports of suspected child abuse to be shared with public and non-public schools in situations involving school staff or independent contractors of the school system. The school superintendent or the principal can then carry out appropriate personnel or administrative actions following a report of suspected child abuse committed by a school employee or independent contractor. For example, this would include a bus driver or bus assistant in that school system. Currently, the sharing of neglect reports is not authorized. I want to make that distinction very clear for the committee. As written, the current law leaves a wide gap in our safety net to protect children from harm. We are almost there, and with a favorable report, together we can close the gap that now exists around child neglect. The department asserts, and I hope the committee members will agree, child neglect allegations are equally important for school administrators to be notified about so that they may take appropriate and timely personnel action to ensure the safety of Maryland's children. The Maryland Department of Human Services contracts with several child placement agencies for foster home services when a public foster home is not appropriate or available. Currently, CPS is only allowed to share specific CPS information with child placement agencies involving employees, for example, the foster parent. For purposes of personnel action, the statute does not allow CPS to share information involving other household members, including the case of a private foster home, backup babysitters, or frequent household members who may be determined to be an alleged maltreater. by allowing a child placement agency to know at the initiation of an investigation that a report was received, all placements can be suspended until the investigation is concluded and CPS can share all details of the finding with the child placement agency for further action. As provided in my written testimony, child neglect represents more than half of the reports received by the department. This legislation allows the Maryland Department of Human Services and our community partners to communicate important information and work together to keep children safe in every environment and in every circumstance. I thank you for your time and request a favorable report on Senate Bill 710. If you have any questions, I am happy to answer them for you at this time. Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman Smith and members of the committee. I am still Courtney Thomas Winterberg, Chair of the Maryland Association of Social Services Directors. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony in support of Senate Bill 710. The local departments of social services through our Child Protective Services units are responsible for the assessment, investigation, and intervention regarding cases of suspected abuse and neglect. The department currently has the authority to disclose reports of suspected child abuse by an employee or independent contractor to authorized personnel of public and non-public schools and child care facilities. Sharing these reports serves as an important tool to prevent further abuse, as it allows appropriate personnel action to be taken if warranted. Senate Bill 710 expands the department's authority to include disclosures of reports of neglect, regardless of whether the victim attends the specific school system or child care facility. The passage of this legislation would also allow the Child Protective Services staff to disclose a report of abuse and neglect to a child placement agency where the alleged maltreater is someone other than the licensed foster parent, but resides within a licensed foster care household, is a member or someone in the home that has the responsibility of providing care and supervision. We believe this expanded authority is not only important, but necessary, given that neglect is the most commonly reported type of maltreatment statewide. Since 2016, it represents more than 60% of our cases annually. We believe this expanded disclosure authority will enhance the safety of all children in Maryland by helping to inform and mitigate the risk of harm. We respectfully ask your support of the Senate bill.
All right, thank you very much. Questions from the committee? Cold bench today. All right, seeing none, thank you very much. Good to see you all. It's always good to see the administration coming in testifying on the bills. It's great. It's refreshing to see. Thank you for being here. All right, so we have that. I think that'll conclude the testimony for the proponents of the bill. We have one person signed up in opposition. Is Ms. Taylor here?
I might as well keep standing. Good afternoon, Chairman and Senators. Danita Taylor here from the Public Defender's Office. We are here in opposition of this bill. I've been doing this work since 1991, representing children at first and now representing parents. My only people I haven't represented is the department, which is the state. However, we are not in agreement with this bill. This bill is really a collateral consequence of being investigated by the Department of Social Services. It does not even require a finding before this information is shared with someone with the school system. It does not even require that the child who is involved in these allegations of neglect attends the particular school or isn't even in school. These are what we have to really be cognizant of, are mere allegations. Mere allegations that can affect someone's livelihood. People who work at the lower level of employment within the school system, the cafeteria lady, the bus driver, the bus aide, the maintenance person, the person who cleans the school, who does the grounds. Why, for a neglect allegation, not even a finding by a court that the neglect did occur, but an allegation of neglect, should this information be reported and shared with their employer? We then run the risk of people who may have a neglect finding being unemployed without work because of a mere allegation. And neglect is not abuse. Neglect is, in Maryland, unfortunately, many times equates to poverty. It equates to poverty, it equates to lack of education, it equates to a lack of resources, it equates to a lack of a safety net. It is not abuse. It is not physical abuse. It is not sexual abuse. It is not mental abuse. It is a failure to provide according to our community standards. We would say that this should not be favorably out of this body by this group.
Excellent. Questions from the committee? All right, Ms. Tiller, good to see you. Thanks a
to
lot.
see you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, with that, that'll conclude the hearing and the testimony in the hearing for Senate Bill 710. Thank you all very much. We'll now move on to Senate Bill 711. Come on back up.
I'll bring my panel.
You might as well just stay up here, yeah.
Well, good afternoon again, Chairman Smith and members of the committee. For the record, I'm Kevin Geiswhite. I'm the Executive Director of the Child Support Administration with Maryland's Department of Human Services. And I thank you for the opportunity to testify today in support of Senate Bill 711. Again, I'm joined today by the Acting Secretary, Rafael Lopez, as well as Ms. Courtney Thomas Winterberg, who is the Allegheny Director of Allegheny County, Director of Department of Social Services. And I thank them both for their presence here today. Senate Bill 711 will extend the department's existing enforcement tools that already includes casino and lottery intercept to now add sports wagering and fantasy competition. When a parent owes child support but is not paid, past due arrearages accrue. Child support has a variety of important tools to assist us in ensuring that the collections are received to support Maryland's children. Since 1988, Maryland has intercepted lottery winnings for this purpose. And since 2015, when casino winnings were added, Maryland has collected approximately $5.6 million to support our children. Senate Bill 711 adds sports wagering and fantasy competition to our ability to collect winnings to support the children who deserve the financial support from both parents in order to grow and to thrive. All processes that are currently in place and working well for casino and lottery winnings will now also be extended to include the sports wagering and fantasy competition winnings. When an obligor owes $150 or more in past due support, the sports wagering licensee, online wagering operator, or fantasy competition operation would withhold the prize and send it to Child Support Administration to satisfy any payment toward arrearages that are owed for the obligor's child or children. Maryland's children deserve all of the financial support that we are able to collect on their behalf. And for these reasons, I strongly urge a favorable report by the committee, and thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
Good afternoon, Chairman Smith and members of the committee. For the record, I am Courtney Thomas Winterberg, Director of the Allegheny County Department of Social Services, and testifying as Chair of the Maryland Association Social Service Directors Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of Senate Bill 711. Child support helps to ensure that children have access to necessities such as food, clothing, and shelter. Child support is a critical component of reducing child poverty and improving child well-being, both here in the state of Maryland and nationwide. Since 1988, children in Maryland have benefited from lottery intercept enforcement that has allowed the state to collect from non-custodial parents with arrears balances that exceed $150. In fiscal year 2022 alone, lottery intercept enforcement accounted for over $750,000 that was collected and subsequently distributed to families. Senate Bill 711 would amend the current law, expanding it to include the interception of winnings from sports wagering and fantasy competition, which was legalized in the state in 2021. The interception of winnings from these competitions would serve as an additional tool for child support enforcement, as these activities can generate substantial winnings for participants, which could be used to help non-custodial parents meet their back child support obligations. On behalf of the Maryland Association of Social Service Directors, I respectfully request your support to pass Senate Bill 711, so Maryland does everything possible to ensure that non-custodial parents meet their child support obligations and that the children receive the financial support that they need and deserve.
All right, questions from the committee? All right, Senator West.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm trying to figure how this is going to work. in practice. So it sounds like the administration certifies to the state lottery and gaming control agency that someone owes child support, right?
Correct.
And then, so the agency now knows that, and somebody goes online and makes a sports wager with one of these sports betting companies. And then how does the sports betting company that has to pay off to the person who wins find out from the state gaming commission that this person owes money in child support?
I'm sorry, we would be sharing that information with them to match so that they would know when they match against our list of obligors.
So you'll give this information about child support to every single company licensed to deal in sports wagering, right?
That's the goal, yes.
So if I owe child support, my name, even though I never wager and make a sports wager, my name's going to be provided to all these wagering companies with the amount of child support that I owe. That's how it works?
Yeah, that's how it works, yes.
Okay. Have you ever gotten complaints for people that this kind of personal information is being shared with sports wagering companies?
I have not personally heard of any complaints about that.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Thank you.
I know this was reviewed in your testimony, but this happens right now for current gambling.
It does.
So I was just talking to towns we were just discussing. What is the threshold typically for regular gambling? Is there a financial threshold for winnings?
I think it's $150 for all.
$150. Okay. So then that triggers.
Child support obligation.
That's a child
Support, yes.
And then you're already gonna furnish this list already. Like you kind of do this on a rolling basis or so. How often does that list?
Yes, I forget how often it is, but we refresh it occasionally. Like it's every month.
You have to forgive us. We're not as steeped in
Oh, I
this.
know, yeah.
It's good. All right. Additional questions from the committee? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very
And we have
much.
one more virtual participant. Ms. Dubosk is here again. So we'll pipe her in. Welcome. We can see and hear you.
Good afternoon again, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman, and members of the committee. Again, my name is Jennifer Dubosk. I'm the Director of the Dorchester County Department of Social Services, and I've submitted written testimony in support of Senate Bill 711. I wanted to add a few more highlights. So Senate Bill 711 would amend current law related to lottery intercept enforcement that allows the state to collect from non-custodial parents who have an arrearage balance exceeding $150. By expanding it to include interception of winnings from sports wagering and fantasy competition. And to give you an idea of how that has impacted us, in federal fiscal year 2022, Dorchester County was able to intercept $5,000 from lottery casino winnings that was paid toward child support arrearages. And I know that doesn't sound like a lot of money, but it's better than nothing. So with the addition of the ability to intercept winnings from sports wagering and fantasy competitions, Dorchester County and jurisdictions across the state of Maryland can help to ensure that non-custodial parents meet their child support obligations and that the children receive the financial support that they need and deserve. So I really do appreciate the opportunity again to testify, especially virtually this afternoon, and respectfully request that you support the passage of Senate Bill 711. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, that'll conclude the hearing for Senate Bill 711. Thank you all very much. Good to see you all. All right, we'll now move on to Senate Bill 701.
Good afternoon, Chair Smith, Vice Chair is not there, and members of the Judicial Proceedings Committee. I'm Jennifer Beskett on behalf of the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services. Secretary Scruggs sends her regrets. We had competing hearings. So I'm here today on behalf of Senate Bill 701, which is a bill that's intended to lower the age at which the state is able to hire correctional officers. At the beginning of 2023, the department had 600 correctional officer vacancies. There was also a work study done by the Moss Group that was submitted this year that indicated that we have a need for an additional 2,500 correctional officers to ensure that we are meeting our mission of protecting the public, its employees and detainees and offenders under our supervision. These vacancies exist despite significant steps that have been taken to address hiring and retention issues, including hiring bonuses, Salaries for both entry-level officers and lateral transfers have been increased. A retention longevity pay incentive program has been implemented. We've had an increased presence in the community at job fairs with colleges in an attempt to recruit. We engaged with the Maryland State Ad Agency to obtain assistance in our marketing message and our recruitment efforts. And we've streamlined the hiring process to include a one-day conditional offer if you attend any of our recruitment fairs or job or community events. But if you're also coming in from outside, just applying through the traditional methods of application, we streamlined that hiring process as well. Despite these improvements, the department continues to face recruiting challenges. We compete with the federal government, surrounding states, and local detention facilities for qualified candidates. These other agencies have the ability to hire under the age of 21. By the time that an individual turns 21, obviously the pool for our candidates has been depleted significantly. Changing the age to 19 allows the department to be considered by career-minded individuals who are seeking to work in public service and who want to remain in their local communities. Even the military, you can recruit at 18, but we have some individuals who choose not to go to the military, but are still looking for a career opportunity. It also provides the opportunity for a gap year between high school and, between high school graduation and coming into a career, which allows individuals to be out in their communities, gaining experience in the workforce and trying to determine where it is they may want to work. The bill simply changes the age at which an individual may apply to the department to become a correctional officer. It does not change hiring standards or selection standards. And for that, I urge a favorable report on Senate Bill 701.
Sorry, Senator West, Senator first, and then Senator West, sorry.
Very much. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I was looking at the legislative history, and I know the bill's been introduced before, so I looked back to see. I mean, it was asked me, obviously they were opposed to this last year, and I'm looking at their letter of opposition again this year, which is it's essentially the same as last year. And I know within that letter, they talk about how the department tried this before and it seemed to have been unsuccessful. So the age was increased again. And they list some other reasons, I guess, that were found when this was attempted before as the reason for their opposition. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Would you mind speaking to that?
In the past, the department did hire at 18. And in the past, when we've been in front of this committee, we have brought in correctional officers who were hired at 18 and have had a significant and excellent career with us. The reason that we are looking at 19 again is to give that year, that additional year for individuals to go out and get some experience. I've also spoken with our Director of Intelligence and Investigation to see if being 18 or 19 or 20 has a higher frequency of being investigated for any kind of corrupt acts within our facilities. And what I've been informed is that it's across the board. Any type of corruption with any of our officers is across the board and from every age range. There's no higher number of 18 or 19-year-olds who are being investigated than there are 40 or 50-year-olds.
But I don't think they spoke about corruption, but what they did speak about was manipulation.
Yes.
And I mean, my daughter's 18, so I mean, you're talking about bringing essentially children in to kind of to watch over. And when you're incarcerated, and I mean, in a penitentiary versus a jail, I mean, these are the people who we believe are people who deserve to be incarcerated for some of the more heinous crimes. Do you think that that their age puts them at a disadvantage, which would then put others at a disadvantage?
So what the department has done is we've reevaluated all of our processes. We have an academy that focuses very heavily on how individuals can be manipulated. We also do field training, and the individuals that we hire on a I can't speak, I'm sorry, on a probationary period for approximately 1 year from the time that they are hired. They are seen by all level of eyes, all level of supervisors. I'm not so sure that it's age. I also have a child in that age range. I'm not so sure it's age as much as maturity. And we certainly, through the academy, through the field training, through the probationary period, can observe, attempt to do corrective action, or as needed, terminate if that's a requirement.
This cadet program that they referenced, is that still is going on?
The cadet program is currently on hold.
It's on hold.
Yes,
Thank you very much.
you're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a quick question. Is it a requirement of anyone who's hired that that person have graduated from high school?
I believe that I would have to check on that. I'm not sure if we require a high school diploma or a GED. So if I can just check on that,
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
you're welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. At age, it seems like other facilities, local, and according to your testimony, because I'm not sure if that's certain, can you just say, are there other local correctional facilities that are able to hire at age 18?
Yes,
And you want to say it on the record? Yes, that's correct.
yes.
And then if they are, have they had troubles or problems with those 18-year-olds performing the duties? Is there a high turnover rate for these 18-year-olds? Do you know that information at all?
So I can't speak to the local correctional facilities. In this system, we have the state facility and then we have the local. However, the local facilities often house the same individuals who are coming to our facilities. If somebody has been sentenced to a period beyond 12 months, they will eventually come to the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services, but they may be housed at the locals for approximately 1 year before they come to our facilities. So 18 at the locals is still supervising the same individuals who are coming to our facilities.
Got it. So it's not much of a difference of who they're supervising from one to the next.
They're the
same.
same people. Ours
Got it.
ours may have a more serious charge and a longer period. They have a longer sentence, but they have the ability to supervise those individuals for a period of time before they come to us.
Got it. And looking at ASME's letter, they did mention something about a lot of it is about just the salaries that are offered for some of the employees that are starting salaries. I noticed in your letter, you said there's bonuses and there's other pieces too. What's a typical salary for an entry level person that would come in at the age of 19? What would that be, and how is it compared to either the locals or any other job in public safety?
So the entry level salary for a state correctional officer is $50,551. There is a $5,000 hiring bonus. And if you are recruited in one of our hard to hire regions, there's an additional $2,500. I'm not familiar with the local salaries. I do know that surrounding states have a salary that is very similar to ours till you put in their hiring bonuses.
Got it. And last question, because this bill is only about age. There's not a lot of other information in there, not a lot of other changes in there. But sitting on some of these, we're trying to hire more police officers, trying to attract people to the profession. The work group that I sat on, they mentioned that there was other factors that kicked out a potential applicant as they went through the process of training or even the vetting process. What have you seen has been like the number one cause of some of the applicants that go through that apply, but then are no longer eligible due to what reason? What's the number one reason?
I would have to speak to our HR people as far as people who are hired and then leave the system. I know that in the past, there are standards set through the Correctional Training Commission. And in the past, we've had to disqualify applicants pretty much around marijuana. And I know they've looked at and reviewed those standards recently.
And I was going to say that too, because I know we changed that at the state level. It was one of the recommendations that I made at the local level, but is that actual law still that if you smoke, because it was like 3 years, if you smoke marijuana within the last 3 years, then you cannot be a police officer in the state of Maryland, or you won't be certified as a police officer. Is that the same criteria right now for this position?
I will check and I will get back to you. I came from that environment and I'm not sure what they have changed since I left that environment. I just didn't keep up with it. I apologize.
Yeah, I mean, we saw that they eliminated most Black and brown people from getting into that job because of it. because of that provision. So I'll be interested to see what that looks like, if you can get that information to us.
So the 3 years you're speaking to the Police Training and Standards Commission, the Correctional Training Commission has a different set of the standards are similar, but I believe they have a different standard on the marijuana use.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm really appreciate what you're going through and the fact that you're having such a hard time filling vacancies, and you're also well below what we need. And this is true, as my colleague across the way said about law enforcement. But it seemed to me what I heard you say was that you've tried a lot of strategies. If I had to summarize them, they sound like they're monetary, right? Bonuses, different hiring, right? And none of that has been successful or very successful. Is that correct?
We have had a lot of success actually in the central region, which is the Jessup area, where we do not have the number of vacancies that we do on the Eastern Shore and the western part of the state. So we've been successful with a lot of our recruitment and retention efforts. The problem that we're running into is that the pool is narrowing, and we are seeking an opportunity to expand who we can recruit, especially in the outlying regions of the state.
You didn't mention that, I don't think, in the beginning of your testimony. So explain to me, you're doing well Central Maryland, but you're having trouble at the ends of the state, the Eastern Shore, Western Maryland. And why is that again?
The hiring for the western and the eastern regions, they're more spread out. They're more, I guess, less dense in terms of the population and the applicants who can apply.
But that's always been true.
Yes.
Is your vacancy issues and your understaffing issues recent or longstanding?
Our vacancy issues have been longstanding.
Okay. And what I can tell you about some of the local detention facilities, as I understand it, is it's not so much how much money they pay, but it has to do with the local sheriff's ability to give different responsibilities. Correctional officers, sometimes they let them do some driving and do other things so they don't kind of burn out with the inmates at all times. And they're doing creative things. Do you have that kind of flexibility to, offer these correctional officers some diversity in their jobs?
Yes, the department has many divisions and units. We also have an administrative side that once somebody has gained some experience as a correctional officer, they could transfer into an administrative position. We have an intelligence investigative division. We have a transportation unit. We have special operations divisions. We have a multitude of opportunities.
And then my last question is, do you have data that shows that if you go down to 19, so it'd be 19, 20, because you can already do 21, right?
Yes.
So those 2 years, how much will that open up this narrower pool in Western Maryland and the Eastern Shore?
I'll have to double check. I don't think we've updated that recently. So if you can give me an opportunity to go and double check.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for bringing the bill. So my question is safety. So in the testimony of the opposition from ASME, it talked about life experience and that kind of stuff. My biggest concern is the safety of these officers that are there, not the new ones coming in, but those that are already there. And how do we get around the life expectancy, not expectancy, but life experiences when it comes to how to actually work as a team and understand having each other's back? I'm concerned about the safety of the officers already, and adding somebody that is just out of high school. Do you have any words of wisdom to address that concern?
So I understand the concern that you raise, and we are speaking about 19-year-olds, and I understand that in many people's eyes, a 19-year-old could look very immature. But the age is one thing, the maturity level is another. And an individual who may have opted to go to the military at 18 is going to be exposed to a lot more things than a 19-year-old who's coming into one of our correctional facilities. They're going to operate, or they're going to be trained on and use more weapons. They're going to have more experiences in terms of defense of our country. At 19, again, they're not just coming into our facilities with no training. They're completing an academy that is approximately, I think it's 7 weeks long. It might be a little longer than that. They are being exposed to all of the things that they could be exposed to in terms of manipulation, in terms of somebody trying to turn them. They are also doing a field training period, either before or after the academy. We have the ability to bring them in before the academy to start their field training, which gives you an opportunity. And I will tell you, having walked into a facility and heard a very large, heavy steel door slam behind me really does catch your attention. And it makes you think, is this something I want to do? So in the period of the academy and the period of the field training, they're actually getting acclimated. And many people will self-select out if this is not the position for them. So I think it's less about the number and more about the maturity of the individual who is coming into our facilities.
Is there some form of a written test or an aptitude test that talks about maturity in your process?
I would have to look.
That might be a way that you could pick and choose who has gotten to that level or not. There again, we put in experience. I get it going through a training, but life experience means a lot, especially when people's lives are at stake that way. So
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I just want to say, I like the idea that you're, trying to create an opportunity for other groups, for another age group. Being as someone that went in the military when I was 17, people would probably still question that I'm still immature. But I know this is shocking. This is shocking. But I do think that the number is not as much. And I want to point out that that's a really, really important element, is that a lot of it does have to do with upbringing. A lot of it does have to do with maturity. And the idea that we're trying to expand this because it takes a special person to want to work in one of these facilities, because not just anybody can do it. I've been a police officer my entire adult life. I could not be a corrections officer. I have a hard time standing in this committee half the time I walk out. I would not be good for that. So there's multiple facets to this. And so I just want to say, I understand your plight and I appreciate that. And I'm glad you guys are aggressively trying to research other avenues. So I guess, isn't that so? Because I have to ask a question.
I think that's so.
Okay, thanks.
Well, Senator Fulton, you're not the only one. You're not the first person to feel like JPR is a jail cell, but some people escape. Some people escape. All right. Seeing no further questions. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. May I just
Of course.
readdress
Yes.
Senator McKay's question? Yeah.
Yes, of course.
So I think, Senator McKay, one of the things to think about is anecdotally, our staff are amazing. They're absolutely phenomenal in the job that they do. And our academy, because I speak to the training end of it, our academy does a phenomenal job with preparing individuals. But anecdotally, while we may not have a test, we have years of experience in people who are looking at, are you arriving on time? Are you able to adhere to just the basic components that give indications as to whether or not somebody is prepared for that job? So I'm happy to tell you stories offline as much as you want, but in terms of a true screening, I don't know that we have that, and I will double check. Thank you.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up.
Yes.
Does Department of Juvenile Services, does the age range from 18 or is it at 21?
I will have to look.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, thanks.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. All right. So with that, that'll conclude the hearing, the testimony for the proponents of the bill. We'll now switch off to the opposition. If Denise Gilmore and Miss Oloyan. Sir Oloyan.
Good afternoon. Yep. Happy to do this. All right. Good afternoon. My name is Denise Gilmore, and I'm a legislative director with AFSCME Council 3. We are very proud to represent the correctional officers who work in our state prisons across Maryland. We oppose this legislation very strongly. I'm joined here with President Olanian. He has given 12 years of dedicated service to the Department of Corrections and represents our Jessup region. He's going to go into more details, so I'll be relatively short. But I think the key takeaway is anytime you ask a correctional officer if this is a good idea, the first thing they will tell you is no. Consistently, those who do the work
tell you that 21 at minimum should be the age for corrections. We mentioned in our written testimony some of the reasons why, the safety implications, are a factor when you lower the age. Again, we've tried this. It hasn't worked. In 2019, we continue to maintain that the best thing that we can do is restructure the salary scale. We know that can work. In 2019, the state of Pennsylvania, who still requires 21 as the minimum age, was able to drop their vacancy rate from 15% down to almost 1% by raising the salaries up to over $60,000 for a correctional officer. We know that that's a piece of it. We want to continue working with the department on solutions that are really going to work for solving this vacancy crisis in corrections. There's just simply too much at stake for us to try ideas that are going to potentially endanger the lives of the men and women who devote so much hard work to these institutions every day. So we would ask for an unfavorable report on Senate Bill 701, and we appreciate the opportunity to testify. Thanks.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to testify. My name is Oluwadamilola Olaniyan, a sergeant at Jessup Correctional Institution for about 12 years, and I'm currently the AFSCME local president for Jessup region. 4 years ago, we were here to testify against lowering the age to 18 years, and today, 2023, we are still here to go against hiring 19 years into corrections. Lowering the age to 19 years is not a reasonable idea to address the short staffing, rather an excuse to why the department has failed for over 6 years to do the right thing and hire adults who will work diligently without compromising the safety of others and knowing fully well that their family depends on them. I joined corrections as an adult, and I know how consistent the inmates throw their bait and prey on new correctional officers to bring contraband. Hiring 19 years old is a gateway to put an innocent high school graduate in jail. There are several reasons why hiring 19 years old for position in correction may not be advisable as proposed by DPSCS. 1, lack of experience. 19 years old may not have enough experience to deal with complexity and challenges that come with working in a correction setting. They may not have developed the necessary mental capacity to withstand inmate manipulation, maturity, and judgment to make sound decisions in high pressure situations. Limited professional experience. A 19-year-old may not have had much professional experience, which can be a disadvantage in a field like corrections. Restrictions. The legal age to purchase cigarette, alcohol, firearms is 21 years of age. Are we willing to give an exception to DPSCS? Do we really want to put other people in danger by allowing a 19-year-old who lacks experience, maturity, and ability to make sound judgment? Frankly speaking, DPSCS has failed to seize the opportunity of the retention bonus to create an environment that will attract and compete with market to hire qualified candidates that will invest their time. Rather, they have spent over $33 million in advertisement to recruit and also refuse to look inward to increase pay and establish programs that may attract new hires and retiring officers. During the staffing analysis exercise, we heard from officers that 2024 is a year that would be far worse than what we are seeing right now if action is not taken.
Excellent. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for allowing me to speak.
All right. Thank you very much.
I'll oppose this bill.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much. We'll start Senator West and then Senator Folden had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Gilmore, can I ask you a question? You need to go back up to the podium. I'm sorry. So I see that that 28 states hire correctional officers at the age of 18 and 4 more hire them at the age of 19. So that's 32 of the 50 states are hiring people who are either 19 years old or less. Is it your contention that those 32 states are acting irresponsibly by putting immature people in charge of corrections? facilities?
So nationally, the standard still continues to be 21. I think if you look at some of these states that have recently moved to 19, we do think it's a desperate measure in an attempt to fix, a national staffing crisis.
So
But we're going to always default to what our members who are doing the work think is best. And I certainly have every reason to believe them when they tell us that, 21 really is the age that folks should do this work.
So do you have any data from these other states that shows that the people that they've hired who are age of 19 have acted irresponsibly or in an immature way?
I don't.
What you're contending is that people in Maryland who are between the age of 19 and 21 are immature, but people in the other states who are in that age bracket are not?
The only thing I'm contending is that our officers feel like the minimum age for a correctional officer here in Maryland should be 21. They're passionate about that, and I believe them.
Okay, and so your solution to the problem is just raise everybody's salaries, right?
I think that's certainly part of the solution. I mean, I think if you look at even the bonuses that have happened, these are, they were necessary certainly to stop the bleed, but putting in a bonus doesn't ultimately contribute, for instance, to somebody's long-term retirement security, right? It's not included in their pension. I think we see this in a lot of in law enforcement, right? Where we had salaries and corrections raised at the same level that salaries in state police did, for instance, over the last 8 years. Folks retiring out of corrections today would have a much better pension benefit, right? And I think those two things are comparable, and they're worth looking into if we want to seek solutions that are really going to work here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So one of the points that was brought up and was about, you can't carry guns and you can't drink and whatever else. But these people, how many corrections officers carry guns?
There's a decent size of them. So any officer who transports folks outside of the facility has a weapons card.
Correct. That's it. The transport teams.
At any given shift, any given moment, it's a sizable enough group.
Are the people that are armed ever in general population?
You mean in the community here? And sure, sometimes they do like hospital visits, for instance, or
No. I'm talking about Gen Pop in the prison.
Oh, no. There are no guns in the prison.
So there would never be a time because you could just carve out and say that these younger people are not a part of the transport group, because most of those positions go to senior people anyways, correct?
Transport position? No, I think you just have to qualify for weapons. I don't want to put words in President Alanian's, mouth certainly, but I think the tie into that was sure. I believe, the point on that was, we have set 21 years as a minimum age requirement for other things in our society based on, the maturity that somebody has at 18 versus 21. Again, I don't want to put any words in President Alanian's mouth.
So at 18,
my guess is that his, feeling is that it should be the same for correctional officers.
So at 18, we're able to engage in a contract. They can buy a house, they can buy a car.
Sure.
You can serve your country, you can die for your country, you can shoot and carry a weapon. The military police in the Army or other branches of service, you can be 18 and have legal authority to arrest. It is your contention that the people that, because of their feelings, I'm one that really doesn't like necessarily all the feelings. I like data. And there's nothing to support their position of this wisdom that's being handed to you by the corrections staff, other than they just feel it should be 21. And then shortly followed thereafter is, and if they paid us more, you'd have more people coming in the door. So because that pay increase, of course, that would be their position, because then the pay increase would then have to affect everybody above that hiring point, would it not?
Well, I want to respond, I don't think this is about feelings. I really do think this is about experience, right? I do think that there is a difference between joining the United States Army, where you are 24/7 in an environment where you're receiving constant training. That is very different than what I think our correctional officers experience, who are in this environment, but then they also leave that environment to go back to the communities, and oftentimes the exact same communities that the inmates that they're responsible for having custody over come from, right? That dynamic is very different from a dynamic that we see with our armed forces. And I would say, and I think this matches the testimony that you heard right before me, there isn't any disputing that the incarcerated individuals that are in a state prison are there for more serious issues and for more serious reasons than we see even in, like our local detention centers. So I don't think it's, quite
They come through the local
respectfully.
detention centers.
Well, but that doesn't mean that doesn't mean that you're in the same, that your case is in the same posture as it would be when you get into a state prison. In a state prison, it's very possible that, you've been given a life sentence and feel like you have nothing to lose. That's very different than, being in a local detention center still awaiting
Your trial. Okay. And then, so this is not a job field, though, that if you left the PIN numbers the same, that you could do more responsibility with less, right? So you couldn't necessarily pay just the current group you have more and still, you'd still want to try to fill these empty PIN numbers because you have a finite area of responsibility. You have a certain number of officers that are working overtime that are going to have to work that overtime, that have to be there and be responsible for those inmates in various portions of the prison regardless. So it's not like we can just say, you know what, your spot's not any good. We don't need you today. Just let them have their own way and we'll move you over here. They're still being staffed and we're paying a lot of overtime apparently.
We're paying tremendous amounts of overtime. And I think, look, there are between vacancies and the additional positions that are needed, because quite frankly, they've been abolished out of the budget over the last several years. The assessment is that there are 3,000 positions needed in corrections right now.
Okay.
So that's, yes, we need to fill the vacancies. Part of that is focusing on recruitment, but I think most of that is probably focusing on retention, right? And that's where looking at like a restructured salary scale will really help, because
But
it'll
so would
ensure-
opening up the field to 19 like other states have done.
But we disagree with that.
Okay. And then retirement. What's the retirement age for a correctional officer?
Is there a maximum? I don't know if there's a maximum retirement age off the top of my head. I can
what
get back
does
to
it-
you on that.
what-
But it's a 20-year retirement.
So it's a
in-
20-year
within the
retirement.
Correctional officer retention.
So there's no
retirement
age,
system.
it's just 20 years with years of service.
I would want to verify that. Off the top of my head, I don't know if there's a minimum age, but I can
Absolute
find out.
People
and get
don't
back to you.
know the benefits package of it.
I
Come on.
understand that it's a 20-year retirement. Off the
Right.
top of my head, I don't remember if there is if there's a max age, but I will.
Okay, all right,
get back to
thank
on
you.
that.
Appreciate it.
All right, thank you, Senator Folden. Thank you very much. Seeing no further questions, thank you all very much for your testimony. Thank you for being here. All right, with that, that'll conclude the testimony and the hearing for Senate Bill 701. We'll now move on to Senate Bill 702. Welcome back. Come on up.
Thank you, Chair Smith, Vice Chair Waldstreicher, members of the Judicial Proceedings Committee. I am still Jennifer Beskid, and I'm still here on behalf of Secretary Scruggs, who is still in another committee testifying on budget. With me today is Errol Edding. He's the Director of our Intelligence and Investigative Division, and also Director Foster from Charles County. The department operates 18 correctional facilities throughout the state, and that includes also our detention facilities. And these facilities are consistently under threat of unmanned aerial vehicles or drones being operated over the facilities for the purpose of surveillance or introducing contraband to our facilities. In order to combat the threat to public safety posed by drones, the department procured a drone detection system in 2022 and is in the process of having these systems installed. To date, 1/3 of the installations have been completed. Senate Bill 702 is another step towards contraband interdiction as it prohibits a person from operating unmanned aerial vehicles over state correctional facilities and adds a penalty for those who violate this prohibition. Since the department's introduction of this bill, the local facilities have reached out with a request to be included. We certainly recognize the local facilities share the same challenges we do, and we have offered an amendment to include local correctional facilities in our written testimony. I urge the committee to find SB 702 favorable with our amendment, and I will turn this over to Director Edding.
Good afternoon, Chairman Smith, Vice Chair Wallsteiger. Errol Edding, in charge of the Investigative Intelligence Division. Drones are a problem for public safety. Challenge of having drones is contraband, dropping down from the skies literally as they're using the drones for that. Over the past several years, we've got about 20,000 pieces have been recovered from drone activity. Some we can directly attribute to drones, some just drop out of the sky, so you got to assume that's from a drone. The problem with contraband, and I'm sure to reiterate, it's one of the drivers of violence inside the prisons. The contrabands, people get debts for pay for the drugs for contraband. You don't pay your debt, you get beat up. So it's for the safety of the staff and the inmates that we think it's a good idea to have the prohibition against drones flying over the facilities. They've dropped everything, cell phones, various contrabands have all been CDS, tobacco, various types of drugs have come through there. Cell phones, a problem, they've been introduced by the drones. And the problem is it also contributes to facilitation of the contraband introduction. You're able to talk directly to people on the outside without the monitoring of your phone calls. So again, it's another method of introducing contraband to the thing. We have a partial a drone detection system that's being a technology is being implemented. We've had approximately about since September 2022, about 45 breaches that have been recorded from the drone detection. Again, we haven't had it installed in all facilities. It's an ongoing process. Internally, if we catch somebody involved with the drone introduction, then we can charge them both criminally and within sanctions, administrative sanctions. So urge the passage of Bill 702. It will provide us with additional tools to fight the contraband.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman, members of the committee. I am Director Brandon Foster. I'm the director of the Charles County Detention Center, and I'm here on behalf of the Maryland Correctional Administrators Association and the local facilities. I do appreciate the bill that has been introduced by Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services. It has certainly been in recent years more prevalent that correctional facilities have either been under surveillance or under threat of the passage of contraband through the means of a drone. Local facilities deal with this as well. We do believe that to codify in Maryland law that it would be a crime to interfere or invade that space in and around correctional facilities or for the use of bad intentions of dropping contraband or surveilling, which could potentially lead to escape. We support this bill with amendment and ask that this committee would give a favorable report with the amendment that local correctional facilities would be added as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I think I know what Senator Sidnor is going to ask, but go ahead. I think we're on the same wavelength here. Let's see. Go ahead.
I don't know. Some reason I remember if it was this bill or some similar bill like this being introduced before. The issue that I would have with this iteration of this bill and probably any other bill is with page 2, section 8 through 11, intent. That's it. How are you going to charge someone for misdemeanor flying something and not necessarily intending to do all these bad things that we don't want them to do. I think I could support the bill if that section was changed, because I get it and I see the seriousness of it. But that kind of concerns me. I mean, I'm thinking of some facilities like those in Baltimore City where you're button neighborhoods. And I could see someone innocently playing with the drone that is now invaded that building space, and now they're going to be finding themselves behind bars. Can you speak to why you all would want someone who has no intent to be charged with something like this? You want to speak first, Peskin?
Thank you, Senator. I understand what you're saying, and I think it may be for somebody to plead ignorance on that, because we would, as corrections, we wouldn't be arresting somebody without the guidance from the state's attorney's office. This is something that we bring to them. What we're hoping in this case is if people know it's illegal, we post signs, you give warnings, because you're quite correct. We do have around the facilities in Baltimore, there's a lot of drones flying around there. And it's a great recreational tool, but it's also a great way to drop contraband in. So there really is the chance that we want to have it as a tool. I wouldn't expect zero tolerance that you got a drone and it goes over and you go and lock the person up. It's a tool to be used on that. We do, but the fact is we want to prohibit it from going over. The best way to achieve that, but certainly not looking for somebody who strays over accidentally at zero tolerance. I can't speak to the legal thing about why it was phrased that way. The idea is to say like somebody feigning ignorance, on that. So I don't know how to address that, but I understand what your concerns are on that, because it's a lot of people like it as a hobby.
If you all, I'm assuming, would you all have, or is it illegal for you all to use some sort of a jamming technology if something were to fly over here?
There's so many technologies. I don't know. What we have now and we're installing is a detection technology. And that's what what I spoke to before. Sometimes it just falls from the sky and you got to assume it's a drone, but there's to have that too, because we have made arrests on that, but we're able to, make the direct connection to the operator of the drone, to the contraband dream drop. So it's more intense. And so I think what we're trying to do is more of a preventive measure, kind of like a no trespassing type of thing, rather than, but we think if we put that in, that will be effective in reducing the amount of drones going over. And we can concentrate on the ones that are intentionally violating that. But it's certainly, my intention would be, no matter how the law is written, it wouldn't be a zero tolerance type of thing where some kids flying the drone over, wouldn't it be, need to go over central booking, because they are interesting views, So whatever, needs to address on that, I'm not an attorney, so I can't tell you how you achieve what we're trying to get on that, but certainly the application wouldn't be zero tolerance. The idea is just so nobody flies over.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Senator Sidnor struggles with the same thing. Probably every one of us. We generally don't create new crimes without an element of intent. But I don't think it hurts anything if you take it out. I mean, obviously, if you've got drugs or some other sort of contraband, you pretty much intended to do it. So
yeah.
Let's go Senator Folden and then Senator West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for bringing the bill forward. It's because intent is an important element, for the enforcers of a crime, and you want to make sure they have the knowledge of it, right? So when someone gets a drone, are they required to register the drone? To your knowledge?
I don't think so.
I believe they are required through the FFA.
FAA
or FAA, not FFA. Nobody cares about that
right.
drone right there. So they're required to register that. Well, I didn't mean if they were flying a drone that over their farm is what I'm saying.
Okay.
So there is a requirement to register these because they had so many of them. So
Right.
they're required to be serialized, they're required to be registered with the FAA, and they're required to be, I don't want to go into too much in the weeds because I'm not absolutely certain on the other points I was going to bring up,
Yeah.
but they are required to be registered. So another component that we're having is that most people that fly drones, they do it with the purpose of what?
Recreation, I would say. right?
Recreation, but
I
are
mean,
they
for
are
us,
they
to drop
videoing?
contra-
Are they
yeah.
videoing or watching what they're doing? Are they not up taking pictures, taking video? And are there other areas that are illegal to fly over or near? That would probably
Absolutely,
be
like
taught.
this.
I think it's probably put out like can't fly near an airport.
Yeah, the airport, I
Can't
think
fly
the
there.
stadiums that are restricted.
You can't fly near stadiums. So there are other areas that are known that you can't fly near. And I believe this is something that is put out once you register that drone, that couldn't we make that a part of the notification process that they're not allowed to fly in or near these areas? Because how else are they learning that they're not allowed to fly over Baltimore
I
Stadium?
think we'd really need a public education thing about that. You know, when we have plenty of signage when you come to our facilities about your vehicle being suspect.
I'm not worried. I'm not even talking about your facility, sir, because I understand what's happening. I've heard about it all in Western Maryland that they're coming over. I think that's where the first case I heard was several years ago in Western Maryland. They were flying up, dropping it over the fence line.
Yeah.
So my question is how are we educating people to tell them that they can't fly over a stadium or an airport? How do they know that?
I think it's beyond my, capacity to answer that.
Is it fair to say that there are ways, there's an education or a component of registering with the FAA that tells them what they can and cannot fly over?
I'm not sure.
Can we get somebody that's more sure than you? Because you're not helping my question.
Okay.
The point being is, no, I'm just kidding. The point being is I'm just kidding, sir. The point being is there are requirements and they are required to abide by them. They are notified and made aware of where they can and cannot fly these drones. This would just be another point added to the list. And then once you violate that by video or other, it would be, you could show the intent that we're trying to prove, because if they had to go and see the person with their craft or when their drone, when they went in charge of them, be like, hey, can we see the video? You can see that they were over it and you could tell the intent. If they're dropping something, they're going to be looking straight down at it to make sure they drop it in the right spot.
So
Could they not?
I'm going to concur that you are correct, that there are restrictions on where drones can fly.
That's good enough. Thank you.
I would apologize, but it wouldn't matter. Yeah. Okay. All right. No, seriously, I appreciate it. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
I think we can fix that. If, we'll be in touch. I think it's a quick, small thing. So
Right. Thank you.
thank you very much. I was not aware of the problem. So, all right, with that, that'll end the hearing for Senate Bill 702. We'll now go to Senate Bill 703.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Kara Annenson here on behalf of the Department of Juvenile Services for Secretary Schiraldi, who sends his regrets for his inability to be here today. This is a technical bill that aims to provide clarification that judges may aims to provide clarification that judges at a bail review for youth in the adult criminal justice system may order the Department of Juvenile Services to provide electronic monitoring instead of adult private home detention or a county-based program. The Department of Juvenile Services already operates a statewide 24-hour community detention program and has the capacity to safely and securely monitor youth with its existing resources. So for these reasons, we would urge a favorable report on Senate Bill 703. I'm happy to take any questions.
No questions.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. All right, here you go. Ms. Dollar, you are up. If you want to unmute yourself, there you are. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Chairman and Vice Chair and members of the committee. My name is Lauren Dollar. I'm a youth public defender in Baltimore City with the Maryland Office of the Public Defender. And the Maryland Office of the Public Defender urges a favorable report on Senate Bill 703. I'm sure this by now this panel is well familiar with the dangers that young people face in detention facilities and jails. You're all probably aware that secure detention places youth at risk of physical abuse, sexual assault, disengagement from education, and increased recidivism, and home detention offers an effective alternative. Many of my child clients with pending adult charges have benefited from the opportunity to be placed on private home detention, and rather than remain locked in jail, the child stays with their guardian, sleeps in their own bedroom, eats home-cooked meals, and other than judge-approved specific outings, the children may not go outside. My clients who get to remain home pending their trials are shielded from the ongoing dangers and trauma of secure detention. In Maryland's adult criminal justice system, access to home detention is typically administered by private companies. The Maryland legislature passed important legislation in 2021 that increased access to private home detention by providing public funding for indigent clients. And I want to thank this body for passing that legislation. It literally changed lives. However, a child's access to private home detention is geography dependent. Colleagues of mine throughout the state in more remote areas, such as Southern Maryland, Western Maryland, and the Eastern Shore, have shared that private home detention is not a viable or easily accessible option for their young clients due to lack of companies willing to administer the program in those areas. DJS conversely already runs a well-oiled machine for statewide community detention and electronic monitoring for youth. The agency is experienced in working with youth and better at responding to common issues that we see on house arrest with kids specifically, such as a kid forgetting to charge their home detention battery. And the process for signing up for private home detention can be cumbersome and complicated for children to navigate, especially from inside jails. DJS, on the other hand, is adept at working with kids and their families, specifically navigating these kinds of things. So given that youth access to pretrial detention through DJS while their adult cases are pending will change the lives of children throughout the state, the Maryland Office of the Public Defender urges a favorable report. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ms. Dollar. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. All right, with that, that'll conclude the hearing for Senate Bill 703. We'll now go on to Senate Bill 705.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Chrissy Nizer. I'm the administrator of the Maryland Department of Transportation Motor Vehicle Administration, and here today to testify in support of Senate Bill 705. Back in 2013, the legislature had the wisdom to say that when a spouse unfortunately lost a loved one, lost their other spouse, that the surviving spouse should not have to pay the $100 title fee when retitling the vehicle in just their name. Both chambers unanimously passed the bill at that time, but one of the unintended consequences that I think none of us could have anticipated is that in many cases, there's only one spouse listed on a vehicle title. And as a result, what we've experienced is that, there are a lot of spouses that wind up in the situation when they're having other expenses and obviously going through a difficult time anyway, of still having to pay that same title fee. So for example, between April 2021 and 2022, there were over 5,100 spouses who got caught in exactly that situation, having to pay the $100 title fee. That even becomes compounded more when you think about families where they own multiple vehicles. So it could be quite an expense. We believe that Senate Bill 705 is really a common sense solution to say that all surviving spouses should be treated the exact same way, whether they have vehicles that are jointly titled in both names or just one name on the title of a vehicle. So with that, I would urge your favorable consideration of Senate Bill 705 and be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you for bringing this bill. Seems like it's a very, very clean up bill, and it's a wonderful bill, isn't that so?
Thank you very much. We agree.
All right. See no further questions. Thank you very much. Thank you. Good to see you. All right. Excellent. So that'll conclude the testimony and hearing for Senate Bill 705. We'll now move on to Senate Bill 709. Here you are. Your Mr. is back. Welcome.
Very good. Again, for the record, my name is Chrissy Nizer. I'm MBA administrator and here to discuss Senate Bill 709. This bill is really focused on our commercial driver license holders, which, as you know, has been a focus not only in our state, but also nationally in terms of ensuring that we have enough drivers to meet the demands of our new economy. For this committee's awareness, MBA is really focused on our CDL efficiencies. So we've removed a lot of barriers, both with the skills test. Now you can actually take a CDL skills test within a day or two, and there's actually same-day appointments available at some branch offices, which we're really proud of. We've also worked with our large employers. So this includes some utility companies, some of the counties who are interested in testing their own drivers. And so we work with them to develop their own program, and then we monitor them. And so we currently have 102 employer testing program examiners and 25 providers participate in that program, 9 of which are new just in the last year. In an effort to offer more convenient options for CDL holders, Senate Bill 709 would allow MDOT to accept the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration DOT medical exam as proof of meeting vision standards for license renewal. So as you know, current state law requires a time of renewal that you provide that vision screening. If you're over 40, it has to be done every time. Under 40 can be exempt one time for renewal. Certainly with the medical certificate, it's required to be completed every 2 years. And if there was an issue with the vision, that would be reported to us and would certainly impact the ability to get it issued. So this change would benefit over 11,000 of our CDL holders. Essentially what it means is they would not have to come into a branch office to complete their driver license renewal. They could do it online, they could do it by mail. And we know that convenience is important, especially when you think about the type of employment. The second change is for our new commercial drivers. So trying to attract more people to the field. Currently, our commercial learner's permit 6 months. If yours expires, you actually have to be retested. So you have to take that knowledge test again. We want to extend that to 12 months, which is consistent with what the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration allows. They changed their requirements a few years ago. There are a lot of new requirements on CDL drivers, including something you may have heard of, entry-level driver training, which the federal government now requires. And so we think 12 months gives more time, frankly, for folks to get through the process. Again, as we look at the data, about 5,000 individuals either had to be retested or fell out of the process altogether. So they never came back to see us after that first learner's permit expired. So 5,000 potential new drivers in the system is something that we think, merits examination, and that's why we're here to offer that change. So we appreciate your consideration of Senate Bill 709 to both help get new drivers into the community, but also to make it more efficient for our existing drivers. With that, I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
All right. Seeing no questions from the committee, thank you very much.
Thank you.
With that, will that conclude? That will conclude. Mr. Campion.
I'm happy to just say.
God bless you, sir. All right. All right. Thank you very much. All right. So with that, that'll conclude the hearing for Senate Bill 709. We'll now move on to Senate Bill 657.
Good afternoon, Chairman Smith and members of the Judicial Proceedings Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to engage with you on this topic. My name is Shawnette Walker, and I am Chief of the Antitrust Division in the Attorney General's Office. I testify in favor of Senate Bill 657, which would require pre-merger notification to the Attorney General's Office for transactions over $8 million. The bill would also clarify that restitution, as listed in the Maryland Antitrust Act, includes disgorgement. This bill will primarily fill a void in federal antitrust enforcement. The bill does not expand the Attorney General's antitrust authority. It only requires companies to identify 3 things 60 days before closing a deal: the parties to the transaction, the assets to be transferred, and the anticipated closing date. Now, opponents to the bill have raised concerns related to topics such as estate planning, real estate transactions, passing down family farms, securities, venture capital projects, beer distribution, etc. Now, some of those transactions wouldn't even fall under the antitrust umbrella. And some of the other transactions would be or could be subject to state antitrust scrutiny today, even notwithstanding the pre-merger notification. That wouldn't even impact that. So I think this bill represents a win-win for Maryland across the board, for Maryland citizens, for Maryland businesses, for Maryland markets. Citizens would get the benefit of competition because a state enforcer will actually examine mergers that could be anti-competitive and that no other antitrust enforcer currently reviews. Businesses get the confidence that their transactions do not raise concerns under the Maryland Antitrust Act. Markets are protected from undue concentration that can lead to negative impacts on price, output, quality, etc. So in short, this bill works to the benefit of all Marylanders. That concludes my oral testimony. I've provided written testimony, and I thank you for your attention, and I yield back my time.
Thank you so much. Do you have anyone testifying also on behalf of the bill today? I think we'll take them before questions.
No, we don't have anybody else.
Understood. Questions for this witness? Senator West.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So have you seen the opposition testimony to this bill?
I have seen some of it, yes.
I've never seen such emphatic testimony in all my years standing here. I think, for example, Mr. Carlson, Bill Carlson, who frequently comes before this committee, who's one of the most quiet and prudent people I know. Here's what he says about this bill. Senate Bill 657 would make the state of Maryland a pariah within the national and international business community, delay legions of commercial and personal transactions, cause corporations, limited liability companies, trusts, employers, and businesses to consider leaving the state, and prove entirely unworkable. Senate Bill 657 is anti-business and poorly conceived. If you've read that, what sort of response do you have to that?
I truly did not understand it, because the bill only requires the merging parties, the potential merging parties, to notify the state attorney general of three things. And that's just who the parties are, what the assets are that are going to be transferred are, and what the closing date is potentially going to be. Now, this letter identifies things that personal transactions. I mean, the antitrust laws are, the state antitrust laws are a complement to the federal antitrust laws. And there are certain things that
But isn't it true the federal laws don't apply unless the transaction is just enormous?
Exactly.
And this law applies at the $8 million level?
This law applies at the $8 million level. And like I said, this law is to complement and to fill in a hole that is left by federal antitrust enforcement. Federal antitrust enforcement is that the deal has to be at $111 million and before the feds will take a look at it. There are a number of deals that fall below that threshold that impact Marylanders that would not be reviewed by the federal agencies.
Well, let me just give you an example. T. Rowe Price is a major Maryland corporation, employs an enormous number of people. And there are quite a few other mutual funds that are incorporated in Maryland, even though they might not be located here. So one of the people at T. Rowe Price decides to buy $8 million of securities of some company, something which I suspect T. Rowe Price does every single day. And under this bill, T. Rowe Price has to give you 60 days notice before they can buy that stock.
I don't think that's the case, though. I think it talks, but see, the construct is that these have to be within the context of the antitrust laws. The antitrust laws are focused on mergers and acquisitions. If this isn't an acquisition, a combination of companies, et cetera, it wouldn't fall under the antitrust laws.
Well, let me read the statute that you want us to pass. It says, a person acquiring, either directly or indirectly, any voting securities of another person shall file a notification with the Attorney General if, as a result of the acquisition, the acquiring person would hold an aggregate total amount of the voting securities of the acquired person in excess of $8 million. Now, why wouldn't that apply to T. Rowe Price wanting to buy $8 million of the securities of, say, Exxon for one of their funds?
And I think part of the answer is that there's certain transactions that would be excluded under the antitrust laws in any event. And I think that—
I don't see that here.
Well, this amendment goes into the Maryland Antitrust Act. And there are certain things that are exempt from the Maryland Antitrust Act in any event. For instance, agricultural and horticultural co-op organizations, those are exempt. So there are certain things, if you look at a section 11-203, there are exemptions to the Antitrust Act. There's certain things that the Antitrust Act does not apply to, certain insurance acquisitions, et
Well,
cetera. And
this-
let me just say this,
Yeah.
all this amendment does is provide for notification. We have the
But
antitrust.
60 days before the transaction. T. Rowe
Yes.
Price can't, if they decide they need to make a purchase for a particular account, they can't wait 60 days
And I
to
don't
get
know-
with, before they can make that purchase.
Right, and I don't know, the question would first of all be if that transaction would come under the antitrust laws. I'm not entirely sure that it would. So that would be step one, does this come under the antitrust laws? And then if it does, then the only notice that is required is that you tell us who the people are, what the assets are, and what the date. the
Yeah, but
closing
60
date is.
days in advance.
Senator West.
Yeah.
I think we've got it.
Okay.
I think some of the opposition may have similar points to the
Okay.
ones you're making.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions for the Attorney General's office? All right, seeing no questions, let's move to the opposition. Mr. Enton, Mr. Wilson, Mr. Castelli, and Ms. Graff.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Robert Enton. I'm testifying today on behalf of two of my clients, the Maryland Bankers Association and the Maryland Building Industry Association. I was amazed. Senator West was kind enough to show me some of the written testimony and share it with me. And I have to say that when you look at it, and I'd urge you all, if you even remotely thinking about passing this bill, to take a look at the written testimony from the experts from the Maryland State Bar Association that practice in this field. So you have strong opposition letter from the agricultural law section. You have strongest I think I've ever seen opposition, as Senator West mentioned, from Bill Carlson, who couldn't be here today, from the corporate law section. And he states unequivocally the detrimental impact that this bill will have on Maryland businesses. I mean, you're talking about a federal threshold of $111 million to trigger this antitrust this notification under federal law. The trigger here is $8 million. Think about it. In your districts, if you're going to sell a 50 apartment house building, it's going to sell for more than $8 million. Now, without any basis at all, you're going to have to wait 60 days to go to settlement. By the time you have to wait, you can't go to settlement for 60 days, and you're going to have to send this notice for what? I see my time is running out, but I'm happy to meet with all of you. I'm happy to answer questions. I would only tell you that no state in the entire country has anything remotely like this. And for all of my business clients and for the experts in this field, they're strongly opposed to this legislation. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Bill Castelli on behalf of Brown Advisory, an independent investment management company based in Baltimore. And we are also very concerned about the bill, particularly the trigger as Mr. Enton described. Federal law has pre-merger notification rules, and there are many companies in Maryland that will comply with that federal law. But the trigger levels are extremely high, 111 million to start, and they increase from there. And not all of those are automatic mergers as well. There are other factors that the federal government will use. It's either the FTC or Department of Justice in terms of not just what is being acquired, but what is the size of the parties doing the acquisition as well. But for a Maryland-based company, for example, that might be engaged with mutual funds where you're actually purchasing, or a private equity company where you might be purchasing, it's not clear to us that the ordinary course of business exemptions would be considered ordinary course. And that would mean that technically thousands of the transactions they're involved with could get captured by this reporting measure. The other factor is that for some of these Maryland companies, because they have the connection to Maryland, whether they're doing the business here or out of the state of Maryland, whatever they touch in those transactions would be captured by the bill. And then they would have the 60-day waiting period. Federal rules actually set a waiting period at a minimum of 30 days. It could be extended by another 30 days. But this sets it as a 60 days. So if you are a private equity company and you're engaged in those purchases and you're competing with other private equity companies that don't have to wait to purchase and get involved, it makes it a very difficult, almost impossible standard for them to meet in that competitive environment. And for those reasons, we would request an unfavorable report.
Mr. Vice Chairman, members of the committee. Sorry, Senator. Mr. Vice Chairman and members of the committee, my name is Scott Wilson. I'm the head of the corporate practice at law firm Miles and Stockbridge. I'm here today in my capacity as the vice chair of the Committee on Corporation Laws for the Business Law section of the Maryland State Bar Association. We've submitted written testimony in opposition to Senate Bill 657 and seek an unfavorable report. I won't duplicate that testimony or repeat the testimony you heard before, but I would just emphasize that as provided in our testimony, Senate Bill 657 would radically alter the acquisition, sale, transfer of assets, sale of securities, and purchase of businesses throughout the United States. It doesn't just apply to Maryland-based businesses or entities, but to anyone subject to personal jurisdiction in Maryland. It would be the first of its kind in the nation. Currently, pre-merger notification and waiting requirements are only applicable at the federal level through Hart-Scott-Rodino. According to the Antitrust Division of the Department of Justice, in fiscal year 2021 alone, there were 7,002 pre-merger notifications for 3,520 transactions. The size of the transaction test for those transactions was $92 to $101 million. The size of the transaction test here is $8 million. The Federal Act further requires size of person and transactions tests that measure the participants in the multi-million-dollar standard level. No such size of person test is applicable here. Finally, the Federal Act exempts by statute and regulation a number of kinds of transactions, including the acquisition of voting securities for investment intent only, unless the purchase constitutes over 10% of the issued and outstanding securities. The fiscal and legislative note here contemplates an impact of $206,000. There is a massive disconnect between what this bill seeks to implement and the expectations of the Attorney General. We ask for an unfavorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Muse.
I just a simple question, and I probably should have asked. In fact, thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, and thank you all for coming. I should have asked maybe the Attorney General's person. What is it in your mind that is trying to be accomplished with this bill? What would it do? I understand that the negative impact, very much so, I think, but what is it that it's trying to get at? As you see it, another way to get to it.
I would only say this, sorry. Yeah, I'm really not sure, Senator. I mean, frankly, it's such a massive requirement. All these notices then are going to have to go in from almost, any business, in your district, your corner grocery store or a garden apartment that has, building, whatever it is, a hardware store. They're going to, it's going to sell. What's it going to sell for? An independent grocery store that sells to Giant or Wegmans. What's that going to sell for? It's going to sell for in excess of $8 million. In today's market, that's not very much money. But the worst thing about it, I think, is, in addition to filing it, it's not that, it's now you're going to wait 60 days. So you got a contract, you want to go to closing. Now you got to sit there and wait and not have any idea whether or not you're ever going to get to closing. Forget about even in 60 days, because the next thing you know, the AG comes after you and seeks an injunction. And for what? Your small businesses are not violating the antitrust laws. So we just don't, I join with my colleagues from the Bar Association. When you look at the testimony today, the witness list, I think there are 10 different businesses and business groups in the Bar Association out of 13 witnesses, every one of them is opposed to the bill.
Thank you. Thank you.
Senator West.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So can I talk to whoever at the panel thinks that he is most experienced with the Maryland antitrust law?
It's not me.
Mr. Wilson,
Senator West, good to see you
look
again.
at you. So when I asked the spokesman for the Attorney General's office whether or not T. Rowe Price would be covered by this if they want to buy $8 million of stock in Exxon, the response I got was, well, we're not sure that they really would be covered. Which surprised me because I would have thought there would be some knowledge from the Attorney General about whether or not this bill would cover T. Rowe Price. From your knowledge of the antitrust laws, as I read this bill, and I'm sure you have read the bill, it looks like it's a self-contained section. Says the following class of transactions are exempt from the requirements of this section. And then there are 5 categories. And the suggestion from the Attorney General's representative is maybe T. Rowe Price in some other section of the antitrust law is exempt from this section. Do you understand that to be the case?
So I would say that I am extraordinarily sympathetic to the Attorney General's office because I think it's a complicated question without a super simple answer. But I think the correct answer is those transactions would not be exempt. But they would be, at least in the federal system, they usually fall under the threshold or within certain regulations that exempt them. And the bill here, I do acknowledge, provides room for the Attorney General to presumably exempt them through regulation, but on its face, it would 100% apply to those transactions.
So can you conceive of how T. Rowe Price could continue to stay in the state of Maryland and conduct their business, having to buy and sell securities on a daily basis if this bill were deemed to apply to them? And they would have to give 60 days notice before they bought any stock over $8 million?
Absent an exemption, I don't think it would be workable.
And, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Senator Sidnor.
Thank you. Initially, when I saw the legislation as I was reading through it, I had some of the concerns that I heard Senator West mentioning, but then in considering what our Assistant Attorney General was talking about, I looked at the subtitle, and under 11-202 11-202B, it speaks about additional considerations. So, I mean, we were always taught that when you were looking at statutes, you got to look at the whole body, right? So it reads, for the purpose and intent stated in subsection A, which talks about the General Assembly's purpose and intent to pass in this, this subtitle shall be liberally construed to serve its beneficial purposes. It is also the intent of the General Assembly that the subtitle may not be construed to prohibit acts or practices which are reasonable in relation to the development and preservation of business or which are not injurious to the public interest. And when I read that, and again, once you put it into context, I think that the legislation that they're attempting, or that they having us look at, is about antitrust, not necessarily T. Rowe Price or anybody doing anything in the common course of doing business. Am I misconstruing that? Or
I'll give it a shot, Senator. Those are very general provisions. And you've got this general kind of provision that talks about the intent, et cetera. The bill in front of you is a very specific statute. And it says, this is what's going to happen. You're going to have to send this notice. If the consideration for a sale is $8 million or more, you are gonna have to send this notice and sit back and wait 60 days. And while you're waiting, you're gonna wonder, and I guess your buyer is gonna wonder, is this deal gonna go through or not? So I hear you about the general language, but this is the way I would read this and see what council says when you discuss it further. And I think the gentleman from the Bar Association maybe can answer better than I can, but this is, you know, from a point of view of statutory interpretation, which is something I'm familiar with. That's a general provision. This is very specific language, which sets forth a very specific requirement.
The gentleman.
Yes, Senator, I think your question gets to a great point that they're very talented lawyers at the Attorney General's office, and there's no doubt they would get to the right outcome. If you look at the statistics from fiscal year 2021 and the federal system, you know, of the 3,520 transactions that were subject to the pre-merger notification requirements, only about 65 ended up being opposed by either the FTC or the DOJ. So I have no doubt that a majority of the transactions would not be deemed anti-competitive. It's the first of its kind notification requirement and then the 60 days to sit on your hands obligations that are the most impactful here. Not, I think, a concern that the transactions are ultimately going to be deemed anti-competitive under the statute.
Okay.
If that's responsive to the.
Thank you.
Wonderful. So I know Senator Zucker has another commitment. And so I want to get to Senator Zucker's bill. Would that be, or Senator West, if you'd like to ask another round, please.
So, Mr. Wilson, we've been talking about T. Rowe Price, but there are lots of other securities firms in Maryland that buy and sell securities, sometimes in large quantities. Brown Advisory being one of them, your client, correct? I'm sorry, was this Mr. Castelli? I'm sorry. Mr. Castelli, Brown Advisory being just one of them.
Yeah,
correct?
yeah. I mean, Brown Advisory is based in Maryland, so it touches, so any of those transactions that would fall under the merger, and there are companies right now that comply with the federal law. But you just heard him mention how many of those mergers actually get reviewed at the federal level. If you shrink that number down to 8 million, and it is an actual merger, considered a merger, even under the federal rules. So you would presume it would be considered a merger under these rules. I mean, that is going to explode the number of potential actions that these companies are engaged in. Like Brown Advisory might be, it could be thousands of transactions that they might be involved with.
So let me just, last question, confirm that if this bill were to go into law, is it not correct that Brown Advisory would have to consider whether or not it could continue to stay in the state of Maryland and transact the business that it transacts?
Assuming, and there is a provision in this bill that does give the Attorney General flexibility to make decisions and define terms and exemptions and other things like that. So assuming that those actions weren't deemed to be ordinary course, then yeah, it would be very difficult for them. It would be very uncompetitive. You know, anybody they're competing with deals without a 60-day period, they would have to wait 60 days before they would even be able to step in and make up, you know.
Thank you, Senator West. Thank you. That concludes the hearing on that bill. Senator Zucker, you're up with Senate Bill 867. And feel free to bring your panel, please.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, distinguished colleagues of Judicial Proceedings. For the record, Senator Craig Zucker here presenting Senate Bill 867, which is the creation of a Maryland Heroes license plate in the likeness of Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman. Colleagues with me today are representatives from both of those families. Just on way of background, it was about 3 months ago or so where a Montgomery County resident, Steve Klisch, who's here today, said that he was at the Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad Museum and was asking, why don't we have a Maryland Heroes license plate honoring real world leaders like Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass? I said, I don't know. Why don't we? And, you know, when you think about, you know, look, those two individuals belong to the world, but how great would it be if we're driving across country and seeing a Maryland license plate and seeing the likeness of Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman to remind people that not only are they world symbols, but they're Marylanders. So what this bill does is it creates a Maryland Heroes license plate. I want to thank the chair of Judicial Proceedings, Senator Washington, and really the entire Senate of Maryland who signed on to this bill. And as like the Chesapeake Bay Trust license plate and the Ag license plate, the funding for this would go to fund African-American preservation. So we can continue supporting programs like that. So with that, colleagues, I really want to just call up the families, bring them up, and you can hear from them. So with that, please come on up and start in anywhere you wish.
We'd love to hear from the families and anyone in support of the bill. I would just note to both those that are testifying and the members here, there's no opposition to the bill.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Terrence Bailey Sr. I'm the 5 times great nephew of Frederick Douglass, president and founder of Operation Frederick Douglass on the Hill and the Bailey Gloche Family Foundation. In 2020, we lobbied Governor Hogan to recognize February 20th as the day that Frederick Douglass passed, and to observe that day. He turned that day, February 20th, 2021, Civil Rights Heroes Day, in recognition of the death of Frederick Douglass. Now they announced it on the 19th after 5 o'clock. So we didn't get to actually celebrate it because it was announced late the day before. So we tried to get him to do it again the next year to no avail, but thank God that Westmore brought it back this year, and he announced it in advance. So we were able to actually get the word out and actually able to celebrate it a little bit down on I know we did on Eastern Shore. And so we did that to try to get a push going to try to get Maryland to actually have a state holiday for Frederick Douglass on the road to getting a federal holiday for Frederick Douglass. The family has been doing this. So I appreciate the senator for bringing this bill forward, and it would be nice to see a Frederick Douglass license plate and a Harriet Tubman license plate, so I can get one on my pickup, and hopefully there'll be one for motorcycles. 'Cause I like to have one on my Harley too. So but we don't have many plates for motorcycles, so like to see that happen. And well, and again, reiterate, we would like to have a Frederick Douglass holiday in the state of Maryland, so we can try to push that in Washington. Thank you.
Good afternoon, committee. My name is Steve Klitsch, and I want to thank Senator Craig Zucker for the several meetings we had back in the fall to discuss this. I'm an amateur historian. I was born in Baltimore. I love the state. I remember that motto we had, land of pleasant living. But years ago, it wasn't such a land of pleasant living. People like Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass, enslaved people that did outstanding things for all humanity. And as his great nephew has said, it has set a precedence around the world. I would very much appreciate the celebration of these two Marylanders, as if we can include them on this special license plate. Their heroism that they performed, for example, Harriet Tubman, she was born penniless, she died penniless. And it's just outstanding, the sacrifices she made, not just for Maryland enslaved people, but later in New York, when she, with her own money, whatever she could gather, to create what we would call, what was called back then, an old folks home in Auburn, New York, for people that had nowhere to go, no next of kin. She cared for these people. Harriet Tubman could never read or write, but yet as a spokesperson for abolitionism and freedom for enslaved people is outstanding. And Frederick Douglass the same, with his oratorical talents. He is the most photographed man in America during the 19th century, the most photographed. I'm sure he would be elated to have his image on a Maryland state license plate.
My only suggestion as an amendment to this bill is that each owner of the license plate would be required to clean it at least once a week. Forget the car, but clean the license plate out of respect of the people who are on that. And as we travel throughout North America in our vehicles, we are proud Marylanders to share our history with our favorite daughter and our favorite son. So favorable support for this bill. Thank you.
Greetings, Mr. Vice Chair, members of this esteemed committee, Senator Zucker. I thank you for the opportunity to speak. I bring you greetings on behalf of the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture. We are abundantly excited about this legislation. The thought of the likeness of Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass being a part of our state landscape with the roads, byways, highways, and interstates is exciting. For these two figures to live on into perpetuity and to be a part of incidental learning in Maryland and beyond is just absolutely excellent. The Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture is the state of Maryland's official preservers, protectors, defenders, and illuminators of the African American experience in the state of Maryland. And we are behind this 100%. And hope that you will support this legislation and create the opportunity for these two, not just Maryland heroes, but global heroes and phenomenons to be with us into perpetuity. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm Edwin Johnson, Vice Chair of the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture. I thank you for the opportunity.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman, and members of this committee. My name is Vince Leggett, and I'm the president of the Blacks of the Chesapeake Foundation, and I make the distinction that we are NGO, a non-government organization. And for the last 30 years, we have been documenting the contributions that African Americans have made to the maritime and seafood industry. We wholeheartedly support this legislation to commemorate the legacies of Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman to be included as an option among those heroes. And I think that's important as this word fans out from this hearing. It's an option to select those. The Blacks of the Chesapeake count both Mrs. Tubman and Mr. Douglass as the bookends of our organization. Both of these iconic and historical figures were born, reared, and utilized our noble Chesapeake Bay as a gateway to freedom. Therefore, we find it fitting and honorable for the citizens of our state to have this option. Their images artfully incorporated into the design of the license plate will help bolster economic development and heritage tourism. In conclusion, we thank Senator Zucker, Steve Flick, members of the commission, members of the family, and co-sponsors from both sides of the Chesapeake Bay. And for the 30 years I've been walking up and down these halls, every time I see hands and hearts reaching across the Chesapeake Bay for the betterment of all, I say hallelujah. Thank you.
Thank you, and for all the good work that you do.
Thank you all.
All my life, yes.
Thank you.
First, I'd like to apologize. I believe that my comments will require 3 minutes and 20 seconds. I know there's a 2-minute limit, and I've done my best to pare this down. Thank you, Senator Zucker, Chairman Smith, Vice Chairman Walt Stryker, and distinguished members of the Judicial Proceedings Committee here today. My name is Douglas Mitchell. My great-great-great-grandfather, Benjamin Ross Sr., was Harriet Tubman's father. Right now, parked in the garage just across the street, sits my car, hopefully. On it, front and rear, are displayed two of the most alluring and intriguing vehicle registration plates, license plates, that anyone in Maryland has never seen. The plates on my car, perfectly legal, current, and valid, depict an arresting close-up image of our majestic national bird, the bald eagle, bathed in a dramatic sunset as backdrop. Why has nobody here, nor anywhere else practically, seen such a plate? And why am I so lucky? Simple. My plates were issued by Washington State, just about as far from Annapolis, Maryland as anybody can drive, which I did. Not surprisingly, I get smiles and eager inquiries almost everywhere I go. People of every color, creed, age, and persuasion ask me about my unique vehicle plates, invariably with excitement in their eyes and curiosity in their heart. Please bear that in mind as I conclude with the following remarks. I'm encouraged that the surplus revenue from the proposed Maryland Heroes vehicle plates will support the Maryland Commission of African American History and Culture. These truly one-of-a-kind plates will not only complement and amplify the noble mission of that body, but also they'll, one, spread the proud and complex history of Maryland, as you well know, a history unlike most, existentially intertwined with that of this great nation, and two, propagate the indomitable, self-empowering values that lay at the very heart of who Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman were. The selfless legacy of liberty and equality for all that these two beloved Maryland heroes left behind will, with these Maryland Heroes plates, quite literally be dispersed from sea to shining sea, circulating through every state, as my plates do, educating, inspiring, preserving, and promoting Maryland's African-American heritage, with appropriate emphasis on the altruistic and empowering values that Frederick Douglass and my great-great-grandaunt Harriet Tubman embodied and so dearly wanted to awaken in all people. Finally, as a great-great-great-grandnephew of Maryland's own Harriet Tubman, I've been deeply inspired, obviously, by her heroic life and legacy. Accordingly, in service to her unfinished mission, I aspire to share and to spread her timeless, uplifting message of hope and self-determination, just as far and as wide as possible. I know the Maryland Heroes vehicle registration plates that are before you today will do just that.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell.
I thank you sincerely for receiving my voice today, but especially for following in the footsteps of our dear Aunt Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass in taking firm action to turn a wonderful idea into a living reality, just as they did. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Senator Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to say, thank you for bringing the bill, Senator Zucker, and thank you for all of your testimony. Initially, I was going to ask to let you know, to remind you that once you present a bill, it becomes a work product of this committee. And I was going to make sure that I was on. And then I saw that not only am I on, every member of this committee is on. That means you have done your work, your homework, Senator Zucker. And so with that, I'd move favorable. Thank you so much for coming.
Yes.
I do actually have one question. What, because I don't see it in the fiscal note, are there other similar tags for other heroes or historic Marylanders? I just don't see it in the fiscal note if we do name others.
No, I mean, so there's really three standard plates. One is the one that you would get when you go to the MBA. Second is the Chesapeake Bay Trust, and then there's the ag tag. You might have, and I won't name certain organizations to do favoritism, but there's other small organizations that you can get basically commodity plates for like an organization, but this would be part of the Maryland standard license plate issuing.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for coming today. Really appreciate your testimony. And you mentioned the values of these heroes who will be on these plates, and those are certainly values we all share. So thank you again for your testimony today. That concludes the hearing on Senate Bill 867. We'll move on to our final bill of the day, Senate Bill 499. Senator West. As you're coming up, Senator West, I'll give you the history on the previous work group to study reentry, which was sponsored by, if you remember this name, Delegate Jerron Levi, from many, many years ago when Delegate Levi ran for higher office. I was appointed in her place on the first task force on reentry, which was the task force that recommended the Justice Reinvestment Act, which the chairman eventually passed. So everything comes full circle. Senator West, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a pleasure to be here before the committee this afternoon to present Senate Bill 499. This is my next to last bill. You'll get my last bill tomorrow, and then you won't have to listen to me anymore. Actually, this bill is easy to explain. Anybody who was in the Senate 2 years ago will recall the Juvenile Restoration Act. It was a bill to enable juveniles who were convicted for juvenile crimes and sent to jail for many years. And after 20 years in prison, they are permitted to apply to the court that sentenced them for a change in the sentence, maybe an elimination of the rest of the sentence. And the judge, in order to grant their request, would have to hold, number one, that they're no longer a threat to society based on evidence adduced before the court. And secondly, that the interests of justice would be served by reducing their sentences. This was a controversial bill. My fellow Republicans voted against it. It was passed both houses. The governor then vetoed it, and I had to stand on the Senate floor and urge my colleagues to override the governor's veto, which they did. So 2 years later, this past fall, I was invited to a colloquium at the University of Maryland Law School in the moot courtroom. And it was on what has happened to the Juvenile Restoration Act since it was passed. And on the panel that evening were 4 people who had been released as a result of the Juvenile Restoration Act. And they told heartrending stories. And by the end of once they'd finished, my conclusion was I wouldn't want to send a single one of them back to jail. I think the bill was correct, and I think they used it correctly, and they got out of jail as a result of the bill, and good for them. And they were all 4 embarked on productive lives. So I felt good about passing the bill. The one thing that was concerning to me was that their big complaint was when they were released from jail, they were simply dropped off on the street with nothing more than the shirt on their back. And they said it was really tough for them at first to try to get back into the swing of things and not revert to a life of crime, because they had no money, they had no income, they had no job, they had nothing going for them at all other than the shirt on their back. So I turned to Jazz Lewis, Delegate Jazz Lewis, who was my co-sponsor or cross-sponsor 2 years ago of the Juvenile Restoration Act. And I said, Jazz, we got to be able to do something about this. Why don't we take a look at people who are being released from prison in general, not just the Juvenile Restoration Act people, but all people being released from prison, and try to find out what we should do with them, not to them, but with them, in order to make it most likely that they will successfully re-enter lawful society and will not recidivate. So that was the origin of this bill. This bill is a work group to study re-entry from the Maryland correctional system. And it's very simple. The work group is to study the current role of state and local agencies in the re-entry of formerly incarcerated individuals after completing their terms of confinement in state and local correctional facilities, and then make recommendations regarding policy changes for the improvement of re-entry in this state. I will say that in the weeks since the bill was introduced, I received a large number of people, and their only reaction to the bill is, I want to be in the work group. So I'm not aware there's anybody opposing this work group. So I intend to provide an amendment to my bill before we consider it, making prudent decisions as to how many people ought to be in the work group and who they should be. We don't want the work group to get too unwieldy, but certainly there are people that I did not think of when I wrote the bill who ought to be in the work group and who have asked to be in the work group. And so you can get that. You're going to get that before you in the future. With that, I conclude my testimony. We have some witnesses.
Yeah, let me just go ahead and call people up here. Mr. Pica, Matthew Pica, Daryl Carrington, Grayson Wiggins, Brian Sacanetti. Got it. And Mr. Giannetti, please come on up. Whoever would like to go first.
Thank you, Senator West. As in form of introduction, John Giannetti Jr., Maryland Criminal Defense Attorneys Association. I admire what you guys do, Mr. Chairman or Mr. Vice Chairman. This is seemingly a non-controversial bill. The reason the MCDAA told me to come out and support it is just so you understand how important it really is. And the criminal defense attorneys find ourselves dealing with people often that have been released and are back in the population. Certainly for them to be in jail in the first time they had an attorney, either a public defender or a private attorney, that's our membership. So we're very aware that this population has significant issues. As you know, one of our prime pieces of legislation this year is in front of you in another form to try to get those who have committed felonies to allow them to serve on juries. One of the earlier tasks that we did was to allow them to vote again. These are statutory issues, but there are a lot of non-statutory issues that are facing these individuals. And I think even something as simple as a state agency that would be there to mentor these individuals and give them some advice. One of the reasons why they're in jail is perhaps they didn't have enough guidance and perhaps a formal system that they could enroll in to get guidance. So we applaud the senator and his courageousness for this issue and other issues. And I think he stands out amongst many senators for not always taking the easy route. And I appreciate him sponsoring this, and we endorse him wholeheartedly. And we've asked to be a part of it. I'm one of the citizen members to be a member of the Maryland Criminal Defense Attorneys Association. We're very familiar with the plights of these individuals. Thank you all very much.
I'm not sure. I heard John Pica. John was supposed to sign me up to testify. I'm Marty Schwartz, president of Vehicles for Change. So Vehicles for Change has been around for 23 years, but in 2016, we launched what we call the Full Circle Auto Repair and Training Center. We have trained over 200 individuals, most of whom come directly out of incarceration to be auto mechanics. We have an amazing, boast amazing results. We have a 95% completion rate and less than a 5% recidivism rate. We know that more than 3,000 individuals come home from incarceration in the state of Maryland every year, not including what's coming out of our counties and our city jails. And yet 45% of those, or almost 45% of those, return to prison within 3 years when they get out. Many of those return to prison within the first 4 months of release. Our program has been very successful in turning that tide for individuals coming out. As a state, I think we need to find a way to provide that opportunity to the majority of folks who are coming out of incarceration. We would love to be part of this committee. We think that by turning that tide, we will reduce the recidivism rate, we will reduce the cost of incarceration, we will increase a workforce that we desperately need in the state of Maryland if we convince employers to hire people with a criminal background. And so I think it's imperative that we have a system that looks at recidivism, looks at individuals coming out of incarceration, and provides them an opportunity to get back into society and remove that sign that they have on their chest that they leave prison with that says, I'm a convicted felon and I have to walk around with that sign the rest of my life. So we would support this bill and hope to be part of the committee. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Vice Chair and members of the committee. My name is Brian Siseni. I'm the director of the Public Defenders Decarceration Initiative. I've had the opportunity in my career to work with many people who were released after the Unger decision, which I'm sure this committee is familiar with. And currently I coordinate representation of public defender clients on motions for reduction of sentence under the Juvenile Restoration Act. A critical component of the success of people released, particularly after lengthy periods of incarceration, is reentry planning and support. And so we enthusiastically thank Senator West for sponsoring this bill to create a work group to look at how we can improve reentry for returning citizens in this state. The Office of the Public Defender, in our written testimony, has submitted a friendly request for amendments to modify and expand the membership of this work group to improve its ability to do this important work. Because the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services has an important role in the rehabilitation, reentry planning, and post-release supervision of individuals on the theory that really reentry planning ought to start on day one. We're suggesting adding representatives from the department to the committee. There are also some wonderful local governmental organizations. I'm thinking of a couple in Prince George's County and Anne Arundel County that are the Department of Health, the local detention center, other units within the local government that have come together to work on reentry issues. And so we would suggest members from those entities. In the public defender's experience, one very valuable source of reentry support has been non-governmental organizations, nonprofits that provide crucial reentry services like transitional housing and support groups. May I just conclude very briefly, Mr. Vice Chair? We would also think it's very important to have members who have been in prison and can speak to the real world challenges of reentry. So with that, we'd request a favorable report with those amendments. And thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'll be very brief. Grayson Wiggins here on behalf of Employee Prince George's, which is it's a 501c3 nonprofit that provides workforce development services in Prince George's County. They're the fiscal agent for the Prince George's County Local Workforce Development Board. Our amendment would simply add a representative of a local workforce development board. These are the organizations that are federally codified. They're included in state statute, and they provide workforce development services to people reentering, and they serve tens of thousands of people every year, and they are workforce development experts, and so we'd just like to participate. Thank you.
Wonderful questions. Senator James.
Yes. Tell me how there's a reason I'm asking you this question to probably require another question, but how did you get involved in this work that you do?
It was kind of a strange way. So Vehicles for Change has been around for 24 years. We provide donated cars to low-income families so they can go to work. So we've been in the transportation world for a long time. And we decided that we would prefer to fix our own cars, and we got a building and we started training individuals to be auto mechanics. And then we started working with the Department of Labor because there's a training program in the prison for auto mechanics. So we recruit individuals as they go through those classes and get released and bring them into our program.
Got it. Okay. So for anybody, whether it's the sponsor or anybody that's just testified, I realize how important it is to have more voices on this work group. But I also hear, and I hear it constantly, and then the memberships gets really large. So I don't know if it makes sense I'm sure it makes sense to expand the membership some, and I don't want to tell you how to do the bill, Senator West, but does it make any sense to maybe make sure the work, I don't want you to delineate what the work group should do to the point where they feel like they can't do more, but in some sense, when some of these members start wanting groups want to be added, I wonder if does it make any sense to sort of delineate a few of the issues that people are concerned about if you can't keep adding to it. In other words, workforce development, well, there might be a lot of different groups that could weigh in on that. So does that become part of the task of the work group? I would think the work group would know to do all that, but I hear from these members, they seem almost worried that they wouldn't cover these various matters. So I don't know if you gave that any thought or.
Yeah, my general view on work groups is if you get too specific, then the work group encounters a wall and they think, gee, I wish we could go beyond the wall. So my view is keep it general. Okay. Rely on the prudence of the members of the work group to decide the parameters of where they want to stop on this work. I think we can again. Yeah, I think we can prudently massage the membership of the work group in such a way that all the factions will be addressed in one way or another. And remember, a work group can ask people to come talk to the work group.
Great.
So we don't have to have everybody on the work group.
That was my point.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman.
Great. Any further questions for this panel? All right. Seeing no questions, excuse me. That concludes the hearing on Senate Bill 499, and that concludes. Oh, we have virtual. Yeah. Hello, virtual people. Hi, Ms. Emerson. Please go ahead. We can see you and hear you.
Hi, how are you? I was like, wait a minute.
Good afternoon, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Jessica Emerson, and I direct the Human Trafficking Prevention Project as an organization whose mission it is to support criminalized sex workers and survivors of trafficking. The HTPP supports this bill with amendments because it's going to provide essential information to inform the decisions of policymakers and service providers alike who seek to reduce the impact of incarceration and enhance employment and housing opportunities. The amendments that I think Ann is also going to second that we've submitted to Senator West include the addition of obviously returning citizens themselves, organizations providing reentry and parole assistance services, representatives from DPSCS, representatives from parole and probation, as well as individuals with mental health, substance use, and housing expertise, which will ensure that the depth and the breadth of challenges awaiting returning citizens and those struggling with the collateral consequences of criminal convictions are well represented. We'd also like to highlight for your consideration that perhaps some of these additions substitute for the state police and fraternal order of police, who simply do not play a significant role in the process of reentry. Law enforcement will be well represented through the presence of MSAA, DPSCS, and parole and probation. Of particular import to us, to the HTPP, is representation on the work group by organizations who specifically and deliberately work with incarcerated women, given that the number of women ensnared in the criminal legal system has grown by more than 700% since 1980. And that women's pathways to incarcerated are deeply rooted in and driven by their experiences with violence, exploitation, trauma, poverty, and race. Research has clearly demonstrated that women's rehabilitative needs are different, and it's crucial that this perspective be prioritized on the work group. And so for these reasons, we support Senate Bill 449 with amendments. And we are very thankful to Senator West for his willingness to hear our suggestions on amending the bill. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Haven, you're next.
Good afternoon, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Kimberly Haven. I'm here today on behalf of Forward Justice Maryland, and we thank Senator West for this legislation. When I was released from prison, I came out with a bag, a literal bag that had my court papers in it, and I was wearing sweatpants that were made in this state SUI shop. I have a scarlet F on my chest. Reentry is something that has to be lived. It has to be experienced, and every person has their own safety net. It is full of holes when they come home, but they know what works. They know what they have available to them, but they also know the gaps. They know the shortfalls, and they know the barriers. And if someone who has been in that position, we need to be able to articulate the needs for this work group. I've looked at the list, and it is ever expanding of people that want to be on this work group. And I think that that's great. And it's very commendable. And I agree with some, but there are others who have no role at that table, or their efforts are duplicative. Others, like my organization, Forward Justice Maryland, do. We have the lived experience, we have the insight, and we have the direct information that some of our partners don't. And that's by virtue of our having to navigate this reentry system. But we also have the extensive policy and legislative experience to round out and complement the work group. If this work group is serious about exploring the gaps, addressing the shortfalls, strengthening existing programs both prior to release and in the community, then the membership of this work group must be informed by organizations like Forward Justice Maryland, and whose voice, like mine, have experienced reentry. You've heard from groups who want to do this, who want to be a part of this, and they're great, and they're all leaders, but please don't do for my people. Do with my people, and let us inform the needs and the work group. And for that, I urge a favorable report with our amendment on SB 499, and thanks Senator West and this committee.
Thank you so much. Ms. Kirsch.
Thank you. My name is Ann Bokini Kirsch, and I am Director of Advocacy for Prepare. We do parole preparation and assistance, as well as reentry support, and I am a returning citizen myself. So I have my own lived experience going through reentry, and I probably would not be sitting here talking to you today if it was not for the robust network of support that I have in my own family and among my own community. And that is exactly why this community needs to be a part of this work group. we all have different perspectives and we all have different experiences. My experience is not the same as my colleagues, 4 of whom are returning citizens. It is not the same as my hundreds of clients who are going through the reentry process themselves as they're released on parole and mandatory. Each person hits their own snags. Reentry is a road that is full of potholes, and each case is different. There are different types of services that are required, and there are different types of stipulations, some of which are extremely difficult to overcome, and some of which are not. We need to look at this from all angles. We need to start working directly with parole and probation in order to figure out what they need from us. We need to work directly with other groups, mental health support and substance abuse treatment, and reentry support like Prepare that does generalized reentry support, as well as housing, as well as job placement. We all need to coordinate for the best interest of the returning citizen, because at the end of the day, when our returning citizens are successful, our public safety is well served. When our returning citizens hit barrier after barrier and are expected to climb over a hurdle, and we keep adding stones on their back, our public safety interests are not well served because people are failing, and that's not what Maryland needs. This work group is a chance for us to work together and actually come up with solutions in the community that needs them. So please give a favorable with amendments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kirsch. All right, questions for our online witnesses? All right, this time it's for real. That concludes the hearing for Senate Bill 499 and concludes our hearings for today. Thank you all for coming.